Hi everyone, my name's Joe and welcome back to another episode of Homegrown Musician. So if you watch this channel, I'm going to assume that you may be a bit of a home producer or a singer-songwriter and that you've been writing your own music and really want to bring it to that next level. Now something that can help you do this is this thing called mixing. Now if you go on any online forum, people will tell you that mixing's a really complicated process and it's a bit of a dark art, but in all honesty, it's actually quite simple if you just break it down to the core elements. So in today's video, I'll be focusing on those key concepts to help beginners get the best out of their first mixes. So first things first, what is mixing? So obviously the first element of music making is composing. You actually need to write a song or a piece of music. The next element is recording or tracking, where you need to actually record the music. And then after this, we get mixing. So we take those individually tracked parts and we mix them together to make a good, solid sounding cohesive whole, otherwise known as a mix. So mixing is obviously trying to get the best sound possible out of the parts that we've recorded. It's all well and good having written your masterpiece, but if it doesn't translate well onto a pair of speakers or a pair of headphones, no one's going to be interested. So mixing is pretty subjective. For example, just like composition, I might love a mix, you might hate a mix. I might love the Beatles, you might hate the Beatles. It's all down to personal taste. However, a bad mix is still a bad mix, and to emphasize this, I'll just play you a track that I've written before it's mixed and after it's mixed, and you just tell me the difference that it makes. I'm long road. Thanks for waiting on traffic. So now we understand why we need to mix things, let's talk about how to mix. So like I said earlier, mixing can actually get pretty complicated, but it actually lives and dies with one key ingredient: volume. The balance between tracks is massively crucial. If things are too loud, they'll distract your attention. If they're too quiet, you won't be able to hear them and they won't actually make any major difference. And as a mix engineer, you need to set that balance. So how do we go about doing this? So in every single DAW that I've ever used, faders control volume. The higher the fader, the higher the volume. The lower the fader, the lower the volume. Pretty simple. So how do we get the balance between our tracks right? So how I like to go about doing this is I'll give my song a full listen through with all the faders set at 0 and I won't touch anything. What I'll do is I'll make a note about the importance of each part. So I'll say the lead vocals are a 10 out of 10, most important part. The guitar riff 7, so it's pretty important, and the tabourine's like 2, not really that important, just a bit of thickener. Once I've decided the importance of each and every single part, I'll give the song another full listen and I'll adjust the faders accordingly to make sure that I've got an overall balance that makes sense with the music. And then pretty much just rinse and repeat. Keep listening back, big full listens, and keep adjusting your fader levels until you're happy with the balance between the tracks. Then to be honest, you've actually done about 70% of the hard work. Like I said, balance between the tracks is really important, and just by making these simple adjustments, you'll notice your mix start to come together. Now this is pretty door-to-door dependent, but somewhere close to the fader you'll notice a knob marked pan. Now what the pan knob does is it adjusts how much of the track comes out the left speaker compared to the right speaker. So if you stick the pan knob all the way to the left, your track will only come out the left speaker. If you stick it all the way to the right, it'll only come out the right speaker. Stick it in the middle and you'll have an equal amount coming out of both, making it sound like it's sitting in the center. So your approach to panning is pretty personal and subjective, just like with volumes, but what I like to do is keep the important parts, so things like the kick, the bass, or any lead lines, so vocals, guitars, synths, down the middle. Now the less important things I'll either stick hard left or hard right, but if I stick one thing hard left, say a funky guitar part, I'll stick something pretty similar, say an arpeggiated synth line on the other side, so my mix doesn't sound lopsided. So the next thing I want to talk about is equalization, or EQ for short. So what EQ allows us to do is you can retrospectively change the tone or timbre of any sound you've recorded even after you've put the microphone away. So how EQ does this is it allows you to change the volume of individual frequencies within the sound. So if I give you an example, say you've recorded some guitars and they're too thin, you could boost the low frequencies and that would help give them a bit more weight. Likewise, if you recorded some hi-hats and they were too bright, you could bring down the high frequencies and that would help even them out a bit. So one really useful application of EQ mixing is carving out frequency pockets. So say we have our lead vocals and a guitar riff straight down the centre. They're both mid-range instruments, so they might get in each other's way. If we take a frequency range, say 1000 Hz in the guitar, and cut that slightly, and then boost the same frequency range, so 1000 Hz in the vocals, the opposite EQs will give each instrument a unique timbre and allow them to stand out in the mix. So again, EQ is completely personal and subjective, but it can even be used creatively. So a classic example is a telephone filter, where you cut all of the low frequencies and all of the high frequencies, or you could even cut all of the high frequencies and slowly open them up, which is a classic technique in dance music. So compressors are plugins just like EQ, but with a completely different function. So what they do is they reduce the dynamic range of a performance. So the dynamic range is the quietest point all the way up to the loudest point, and they just squash that down. Now the reason you'd want to do that is to help control the performance slightly. Say you've set the volume for your lead singer, and all of a sudden they start singing way louder than they were before, so you have to turn the volume down, but then they start singing really quietly, so you've got to turn it all the way back up. You don't want to be doing that every 5 seconds, so a little bit of compression can help reduce the dynamic range, give a more even performance, and it means you have a better idea of where your volume fade is going to be sitting. Now, you can go a bit overboard with compression and actually take the sort of human performance element out of it, but like I said, a little bit of subtle use can go a really long way. So compression is actually quite a subtle effect, and especially for a beginner, you might not hear when it's being applied. So the best advice I can give to you is record yourself singing really, really loudly and then really, really quietly. Throw a compressor on there and start messing about with it. After a while, you'll notice what the different knobs and switches do, and you'll start to get an understanding of the effect. Another really good thing to do is scroll through some presets, as they can help you get to some really good settings really quickly, so you don't have to scramble wildly trying to find something that works. They'll just give you one that works right out of the box. So at this point in our mix, it's probably going to start to sound quite good. Obviously this is all down to experience, so the more mixing you do, the quicker you're going to get to that sound in your head. However, I just want to tell you about one more thing that might get you a little bit closer. So our brains are actually quite clever, and they can pretty easily tell where something's been recorded. So you can quite quickly tell the difference between the sound of my voice in a cathedral compared to the sound of my voice in my back room. Now obviously I'm not sat in the Notre Dame, so how did I make my voice sound like that? So by using artificial reverb plugins, we can pretty much make it sound like our instruments were recorded anywhere. Giant halls, massive cathedrals, even just tiny back rooms. There's a reverb emulation for pretty much any space. So obviously this can be used in mixing, so you could get really creative and have a different reverb for every single channel, or you could take the opposite approach and you could have one coherent reverb across all of the channels, making it sound like it was recorded in one space. That way it just feels like more of a live performance, and it's a bit more interesting to listen to. So to go about doing this, the first step is to set up an aux or auxiliary channel. This will be found under the new track tab in whichever DAW you're using. So the next step is to set a bus input for this new track that we've created. Now this sounds complicated, but it basically just allows us to send information to the track. After this, set the output to the main master output. This should be the same output as all of the other tracks. Then choose whichever reverb plugin you want and find a reverb that you think could fit the sound that you're after. Finally, find the send section of your mixer and send each channel that you want affected to the bus that we set our aux channel to. Turn the send up, and all of a sudden, the channels should all have reverb applied to them. So that actually brings us to the end of today's video. If you're new to mixing, hopefully that was a bit of an easier breakdown than having to scroll through hours and hours of forums and just getting nowhere. If you have any more questions, please leave a comment down below and I'll make sure to get back to you. Please remember to like, share and subscribe, as it massively helps the channel.